Hey guys, my name is RyanCentral and welcome to HitScan. In this video, I sit down with Max Orcane, who is the co-lead game designer for VALORANT, to talk about the new Agent Chamber, going into a bit of detail on where Chamber is good or bad from their perspective, but also their 200 IQ move, I guess, to intentionally change up the meta in a certain way with the addition of an agent like Chamber. You can check all of the timestamps for specific questions. It's a long one, this, and there's no other gameplay that I can show other than the B-reel a couple of hundred times, so sorry about that. But let's get started. I think the big question that I have about Chamber, like, we have the usual, like, drab on his description, what role he's meant to fit on the team. In your own words, why would I play Chamber over something like a Cypher and a Killjoy?
Yeah, that's a great question. At a high level, Sentinels in our mind are primarily there to stop teams from being able to take sides, right? They hold space, they fortify space. The way we think of Chamber relative to like Cypher, Sage, and Killjoy is that his like primary way of holding down sites is actually like with his weaponry and like with his like gun skill and aim skill. It's like not just about the traps and like the information or those types of things. It's like, hey, the main thing that actually stops people or like scares people from entering his site is like his ability to play different spots with his teleporters or like use his pistol to take out people like in situations when they wouldn't have expected it, and like that causes the slow fields on kill with his weaponry. Like it's like instead of having to throw a slow field from Sage, I can actually like use my ultimate, blast somebody with the op, and then it actually creates like a slow field there to like hold down the site. So he like defends space like primarily with his gun skill as opposed to with like traps and utility. Even though his traps and utility obviously enable him to do it as well, like the big fantasy there for us that we think is really compelling about Chamber is the ability to hold down space with his gun.
Yeah, I mean, mechanically, you have to be insane to make it work, which I guess sort of comes under its own little like category. I guess on the flip side, where would you describe Chamber's weaknesses? Where is Killjoy and Cypher going to be a better pick? I use those two in particular because the question I want to ask about this is he considered in the same category? Like, I know that you have Sentinels, but there's a difference between, say, how the pro scene plays Killjoy and Cypher versus how they play Sage, right? It's almost like a different role on the team.
Yeah.
Is Chamber in line with the Killjoy Cypher, or do you think he's more like that flex Sage pick that you can see on teams?
Yeah, I'm not really sure how teams are going to play him. I think that he brings a pretty unique set of stuff, especially with his like ability to reposition, his economy manipulation, and his flank watch. Like, I think all three of those traits, I hope, change up how people view the game. I think we tend to internally think of him very much as like a pretty direct competitor to Killjoy and Cypher, but also in like kind of a weird way, we also think of him as a bit of a competitor to Jett in some scenarios. But like we can dive into that part later.
I mean, obviously, I think there's going to be a lot of people that go, I have insane aim. This agent sounds great to me. And also because I'm playing a Sentinel, it's not like I'm playing a Raze or a Reyna. We're not running 4 duelists. I could just play the flashy Sentinel, right? And play a role on a team, but also frag out like crazy. I guess what's the downside to something like that? I guess if your aim sucks, then you're gonna struggle.
Yeah, I mean that's one of like the biggest things on this character is like he is very much gated by his ability to shoot, right? Like if you're not able to extract value out of your pistol, you're like your pistol ability and your ultimate, like then you're gonna have a bad time. That's like half of your abilities. I think the other thing is that he tends to have a very limited set of tools to actually take space. Even Killjoy and Cypher have tools that allow them to, maybe they're not the most effective tools at taking space on offense, but they are still tools. Like, Cypher can toss out a camera ahead and like kind of scout ahead a little bit. He can use his cages to kind of block off angles so he can take more space, right? Killjoy can put the turret to hold one side while she moves forward in another side, and she can flush out areas with her bees, right? So she has or even her ultimate, right? She can, that's like a really common play we see is she like goes into sewers on Haven and like drops an ultimate and it clears out a whole site, right? So those characters actually, even though they're primarily defensive characters, they are able to flex offensively a bit. I think of Chamber as the only real tools he has for offense are peeking. Like he just has to like peek an angle and fight. And this is why I actually compare him to Jett in some ways, where it's like, if you set up your teleporters in a way to peek a single angle, like that's like a viable strategy, but you get to peek like one angle that way. And so you're pretty limited on your offensive capabilities. So I think that'll be like a really interesting thing to see how people like kind of flex around him. It's like, how much time does the Chamber character spend kind of just like holding down flanks or lurking around the map? Like that tends to be more how we see him played. So I think that he's definitely more limited in that way.
Was that the aim, I suppose, to have a mechanically demanding and I guess also an exciting Sentinel for people to want to play, right? I mean, you have the numbers, but it feels from a perspective that Sentinel players like Cypher and Killjoy in particular aren't going to be played an awful lot, or people will not want to play them an awful lot in competitive or even in the pro scene, right? So was this almost like an intentional, let's make Sentinel characters a bit more flashy and exciting and take some of the duelist aspects that get people wanting to play them and put them in other particular roles?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually exactly it. I mean, we were looking to try to make a Sentinel character that rewarded gun skill and mechanical skill more so than other Sentinels. I think another piece of it is that we wanted to create a Sentinel that didn't feel like they were like scared to fight, if that makes sense. Like I think that Cypher and Killjoy a lot of the time, and Sage too, a lot of the time you play those characters, you feel like the optimal play is to kind of actually play a little bit more passive and wait for people to try to take space on you, and then you get to use all your web of traps and things like that. So you have to be a little bit more reactive, a little bit more like kind of set up for people to push into your space. Chamber, on the other hand, like can kind of take those aggressive fights and take first angles, like if he wants to. Like that's very much the intent, is that he's actually able to try to get a pick or try to play this like cheeky off angle in a way that usually so far has only been reserved for duelists, where you can play an off angle with Reyna or Jett and like dash out or dismiss away. Like Chamber can kind of do a similar thing if he's really proactive and like it's in his own territory. So he actually has a bit of that kind of like you said, flashy playmaking ability, but it's got this kind of very Sentinel lens where he can't perpetually do that, continuously move forward and like try to take it like 6 angles in a row, always waiting to get the kill and then dismissing out. It's like he actually has to be very proactive. He has to set up his teleporters, and once he has set it up, then from that exact spot, then he can teleport away. It's like it's very very proactive, very defensive first, I guess. But definitely supposed to be a flashy character.
Yeah, and I guess it's aspects of utility that you still need to respect, right? If you go into a site where you know that there's Cypher utility, you have to be very careful with that. I guess for something like Chamber, it's very similar, not only because of those abilities that are just straight firepower, but also the slow orbs that can get shut down, the teleport abilities as well. Yeah. I feel like one of the things I wanted to ask is, because we're in this weird moment where everybody knows about Chamber, but nobody can really play him as of yet. Is there any like misconceptions that you see from people looking at the gameplay and not understanding something, or just from the gameplay that people have seen that you feel was missed and is definitely worth people knowing about?
I don't know if I've seen enough spicy takes to have a good response, to be honest. I feel like most of the takes I've seen have been shockingly like measured or like reasonable, which is, I mean, shouldn't say shockingly, but like it's I feel like usually with every agent we come out with, there's usually hot takes left and right for how crazy they are, how busted they are, or theory crafting one way or another. And I feel like with Chamber, it's been a little bit more tame, and people are kind of like reading into things like what I feel is like broadly correctly. I think one of the big areas that I haven't seen people talk about a ton is his ability to trade deny with his teleporters. Like I feel like that's like a pretty huge part of his kit. And like kind of like you said, like when teams are pushing in onto sites against other types of Sentinel characters, you're kind of like looking out for the traps, and it's like, oh, where are the Killjoy bees, or like where's the turret set up, and then like, oh, Killjoy swings once the turret starts shooting. Like that kind of tends to be the play pattern where you're like going into the minefield, so to speak. With Chamber, it's a little bit less like that. Like you get a little bit of it with the trap, but a lot of the times it's like, oh shit, Chamber's playing dumpster on Haven, and it's like you're fighting that person, then a second later he's like fighting on the opposite side of the site, and you're like, oh shit, like we had two people spend utility to try to clear out the dumpster area, but it's like actually he moved over there. Like that tends to be like the thing that you're fearing more than anything against Chamber, especially if he's able to get a kill, because then he like can slow you down in the middle of that push. I think one of the other takes that I've seen that honestly is one of our biggest, I would honestly say blind spots with regards to how powerful he's going to be, is economy manipulation. Like I've seen a couple of takes around like how powerful it is that he has this gun as an ability that he can use on eco rounds or in pistol round, and he has an ultimate, so 1 to 2 times a half he's going to be getting a quote unquote free gun. I think that's an area that we very intentionally put a lot of his power there. How powerful that ends up being is something that I think we're very interested to see, because I think it's one of those areas that with internal testing is like pretty hard to assess. We know it's strong, we feel it because there's quite a few games where you're like, man, Chamber just like has a gun very often. Right, that's kind of the feeling you get, but the actual impact of that I think will be really interesting to kind of track going forward.
For sure. And I think that the obvious thing as well is you have a Sentinel character that is based around long range fights, not only with the headhunter ability, but also the ult as well. That feels very much like we need another character to be carrying that operator role that isn't Jett, right? Like that
Totally.
seems to be something that you intentionally went in for. I guess like Opping is its own role on a team. Like I think a lot of people synonymously put Oppers with duelists.
Yeah.
Just because of Jett. Like you can op with a Raze, it's not great, but you can op with an Omen and it's not terrible. Now you've got Chamber as well. I guess that's a very dedicated choice to bring some other agents into the game that can have Opping potential, so it kind of takes a bit of the weight off people playing Jett.
Yeah. So generally, actually, when we think about the op internally, we like to think about it as being a gun that can be used by anybody. There's obviously certain agents who can use it better or overcome the downsides of the operator better than others. Obviously, Jett is the primary example. I think Reyna is a great example. Like you said, Omen, people that have any sort of movement ability tend to be pretty good with it, or people that can play in off angles tend to be pretty good with it. But obviously, Jett is like the most commonly used, especially at pro play, as like your primary operator. When we were making Chamber, when we started development on him almost a year ago, to be honest, which is kind of crazy to think about. We definitely were trying to make an agent that was like focused around, actually before we even thought about the operator, we're like, what if we just had a character who was like the sniper character, like a very sniper fantasy, right? He's like all about taking long range fights. They think that they're more accurate than anyone. They like will hit the shot, but that's like what they want to do. They're the person that even on some gun rounds they're buying marshals. That's the kind of person that we want to make this character for. And so that's kind of what led us down the path of like, hey, well, if that's the case, like they probably need to be good with the operator, right? And like, what do we need to do to make this character good with an operator, right? How do we overcome some of the downsides of the op? That tends to be, hey, when you miss a shot, you're really vulnerable. So like, how do you overcome that? That's kind of where the teleporter abilities came in. Like, how do we let you play in angles that are less predictable? Like that's again where the teleporters came in. So yeah, we very much wanted Chamber to be a character that was able to excel with the operator. I think the way that we usually think about like Chamber versus Jett is that Jett tends to be a much more aggressive operator character, right? Like you kind of feel like you're going to be aggressively peeking angles, and then maybe you dip out if you miss the shot. We obviously see Jett also used as like kind of a defensive character as well when she has the op, where she can kind of just hold off angles and then leave. Our hope with Chamber was that that's kind of more the angle that he takes, is he's a lot more of that kind of gargoyle operator character who's just holding the angle and like is able to be very kind of just like this ever-present threat, and
like a ward almost.
Yeah, in some ways, absolutely. I think the other thing too that doesn't get talked about a lot yet, and we'll see how it plays out like as the character launches, is that like because Chamber has 2 teleporter like anchors, after the cooldown you can like return to the first anchor, and so there's actually like a lot of nuance in trying to understand like how to place both of those to have the best impact. Like where do you actually want to fall back to? Would you want to return to the place that you were before? Like there's a lot of like interesting kind of like mix-ups and mind games that you can play around the teleporters that I think until people actually really start playing the character, you won't really like kind of see or understand the impact of that yet. Yeah. I think one of the other things too, like as far as like kind of weapon loadouts are concerned, is like kind of like I mentioned before, we had targeted this character as being kind of the sniper character who likes using sniper rifles. I think one of the unexpected outcomes that we actually had was like, because we gave him the pistol is called Headhunter, right? He actually has the flexibility to use a much wider like set of guns in the arsenal that aren't just snipers. Like we actually have seen him use like judges and buckies and like close range weapons a lot more so, because he has this like fairly accurate long range weapon as like a backup at all times.
Yeah, it's like when Jett players pick up a shorty as their pistol.
Yeah, it's even safer though, right? Like,
yeah,
you can go and play in hookah and have your judge on bind, right? You play in there with the judge and like you have your teleporter to get out if you need to. But let's say, you know, they didn't come hookah and they're on A now and you can rotate over and it's like, well, you have your headhunter to like just take long range fights now as you're trying to retake the site. You don't have to only have your judge, which has been I think just like an interesting, a very interesting like kind of outcome of the kit. He ends up feeling a lot more like a weapons master than just like a very specific sniper, if that makes sense.
Just a sort of jack of all trades with their weapons and what to expect.
Yeah.
And I guess that's probably how you get the most out of him if people are looking to main him, right? Is being very good across different guns and knowing how to effectively bring all four of them. If you include like the pistol, you might have a judge, you got the headhunter, and then the ult.
Yep.
Like being good at all of them is a bit of a challenge in itself, I'd imagine. Yeah,
you have a lot of mix-up potential for sure in how you play. Like you can really get every ounce out of the arsenal, I think is how we hope that he ends up playing.
I think you sort of mentioned it before when it comes to the blind spot of economy manipulation. Is that the thing that I guess like, does it concern you? Is that your major concern when it comes to the agent? But more so like, what is the thing that you're looking at and keeping a close eye on that is maybe likely to change if Chamber comes in a bit over or undertuned?
So one of the things that we do with all of our agents now is that before they launch, we actually create a bunch of things to keep an eye. We create a list of things that we want to keep an eye on. So if this character ends up being over or undertuned in different ways, like what would be the first things that we would look at? It's never just like one thing. It's usually like, well, if they're too strong in this way, then it, maybe we look at this ability. If it's too strong in this way, we look at that ability. If it's not performing well enough, like it's probably because of X, Y, or Z, right? So with Chamber, we have like a list like that for sure. Economy manipulation is definitely one of the things on the list. Like, does Chamber just have full like weapons every single round of every single game, and he like basically just doesn't have to use the economy? Like that would be a bad outcome for us. We wouldn't want it to be that potent. But if Chamber is able to be smart and clever, like can he manipulate the economy in a way that can leave him more set up for success, or like have more weapons, but not in a way that feels just like completely overbearing? That was probably closer to what we would want. I think one of the other ones, I think the other two things just off of the top of my mind immediately are how potent is the trade denial? Like having another character that can trade deny by teleporting around a map and like taking a peek and like getting a pick on someone and then dipping. Like right now, it's really just Jett and Reyna to a degree that can do that. So having a third agent that's able to do something that's very much in that vein, like how does that just kind of change the meta, change the game, especially on maps like Breeze where they tend to be a bit longer range? Like you can kind of hold some of those angles and teleport around. Like, is it just going to be Chamber, Jett, and like Reyna on like every single Breeze map and Viper on every single Breeze map? And like, is that just like such a powerful thing that it requires us to do some additional tweaking or tuning? Like that's something that we want to keep an eye on. I think the last one is that he has global flank protection, a lot like Cypher with his traps, because there's no like range restriction on him. So that's another thing that we're looking at, is like, hey, how powerful is that global flank watch on this character? Is that actually where we want his power to be? Yeah, those are probably the big buckets.
So I got some questions from Reddit. One of these is about Chamber before we go into any other stuff.
Yeah.
It was effectively, you know, like Chamber has a lot of strong economical implications. He's another alternative to using Opping. The question is, like, was there no fair on how the agent could disrupt balance in the game when they're played alongside Jett? But I feel like, from what you've been saying, that has been the point. Chamber has come into the game to disrupt, I suppose, how people perceive both Sentinel agents, but also Opping characters or players. Like, that feels like you went in to stir shit up, so to speak, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that our hope with most of our agents is that we're stirring shit up. That's definitely an outcome that we're looking for. I think that with Chamber, it is very much like, hey, how do teams and how do folks start imagining this character relative to Jett? I think that in like kind of solo queue environments, I think it's going to be less of a like Jett versus Chamber choice competition. Like, I think there'll be some, but I still imagine that Jett's going to be pretty popular. Like, I don't think a lot of, like, a huge portion of the Jett players are going to be like, actually, I was supposed to be a Chamber player all my life. I'm sure there's some of them, but I don't think that's all of them. I think the area where we're going to see a lot more of that, like, really direct competition is at kind of the higher level of pro play, where the reason that teams are picking Jett, there's like a multitude of reasons, and I think that Chamber offers some competition there, right? If you're looking for somebody to play a defensive operator on a certain map, like, Chamber should be able to offer you that as well, but with a completely different set of additional benefits. If you're playing Jett because what you want her to do is just like be able to be very mobile and like jump over stuff and dash onto sites and into smokes, like, yeah, you're probably still picking Jett. Like, Chamber can't really help you in that department. So I think that's the hope, is like, hey, you know, can this character exist alongside Jett or in place of Jett in certain scenarios? I think it could not. Like, it'll be very interesting to see. That's definitely our hope.
Yeah, because I think that's the main thing that's been consistently there across Valorant's lifespan. Like, when Morello was, I guess, doing your job, now you get and Sal coming in, the idea that every agent should have their player identity on what they do different to everybody else. And every agent has their own different hats. The problem has been for so long is that Jett wears multiple hats, like just as an entry, as a mobile agent, as the face of the game as well, to an extent. It's like the poster child. And then also the Opper. So I guess it's just pulling some of those hats away from Jett and at least giving people choices to do other stuff and fulfill other roles on the team, whilst also getting multiple kills with a sniper rifle.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the goal, is we want all of those agents to feel like they have their place in the game and they're unique. And, you know, we don't want to like completely gut Jett by any, like, you know, at all. I think the hope is that we create, you know, interesting choices for people to consider when they want to choose Jett or another agent.
Yeah. I guess the other question to sort of finish on with Chamber is, there's a lot of Jett versus Chamber, but is there a concern that Jett and a Chamber on a team could be too much? We have seen a couple of teams like Team Liquid double up in quite a lot. It makes sense when you got like Yampi and Navera to do that, to be fair. But are you kind of worried in some cases that like double opping, or just these two agents on the team together, Jett having the op, Chamber having the Swiss Army knife of guns available to him? Are you worried about that being too much, or do you think there's a bit of diminishing returns about having two, in inverted commas, opping characters on a team?
I'm not so much worried. I think I'm more curious, right? Is that actually like a viable strategy? Like, if that is, like, then why, right? Like, what maps are people doing that on? What do people do against that? Like, I don't think that's like necessarily like a bad outcome. I think that would just be something that we would kind of monitor and see. Yeah, I don't think we have an agenda around like making it specifically in place of, like, I could very easily see a world on certain maps where you want to do both. And kind of like I said, like, Chamber, even though he definitely has like op potential, and so does Jett, like, they're both able to be played with other types of weapons. And so do you decide to take both of them for different reasons, right? You actually are using them for reasons outside of just using an operator, right? There's like a lot of other ways that they might want to, you know, play the map. But But yeah, I think in a world where teams use both, I don't think that's inherently a problem. I think that we'd look at kind of the broader pattern of play and like what teams are doing to kind of counter strat against that. What's the thing that they're trying to do specifically with that choice in the first place? So yeah, definitely not. That wouldn't be like a problem. I think that would just be something that we would monitor like anything else.
Yeah, I guess the argument would be if just like, again, it kind of comes under the category of economy manipulation, right? Where, especially in ranked, you're playing up against a team that have bought like 3 ops, and they have a chamber and a Jett, and it's going to be oppressive, but I imagine the downside, of course, is that's a lot of money to spend, a needless amount of money, that if you punish a team that does that, the economy is going to be damaged. Maybe less so with chamber, but still enough that I think it's not going to be too much of an issue, at least at the higher levels. So I guess that's everything about chamber before we move on to like other topics around the game. Are there any other final things that you want to say that you were curious for people to try out? Any maps, any sides, any agent combinations of utility that have really piqued your interest?
Honestly, I'm just really excited to see him played. Like the teleporters, I feel like we've internally only scratched the surface on how to best use those and find all the best spots. Like you can be really creative with what you do with them and how you actually use them. So I'm very interested to see what folks do with it. You know, I think one of the default plays that you see is, you know, you place a teleporter up front, like at a close angle, and then you hold it with a gun, and if you get a kill or you get scared, you teleport out and you fall back. And like, I don't think that's the only way to use it. I think there's like way more ways that you can use it. Teleporting, you know, putting a teleporter at a close angle and then holding the further away angle and kind of teleporting in behind them. Like, I think there's so many like kind of different ways that people will use this thing. So I'm just very interested to see how the folks do it.
Because I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I saw was that the teleporter doesn't make noise, that you can play from distance and then teleport next to them, and people won't realize that you've done that. Like just from the gameplay, and because obviously it's like set up scenarios, right, that the Riot devs have done to show the capabilities of his kit. In a lot of those, it seemed like the enemies didn't expect that the chamber teleported, right? Whereas you told me it's, to quote, a medium range of volume, right? So I think that's another thing I wanted to throw at the end of this.
Yeah, you'll definitely hear the teleport. I don't think you can do it dry, but you know, when a site hit's coming in, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of chaos. Like I think if you pick your moments, you can definitely find ways to teleport and kind of catch people off guard. But I think that would be, very situational. But it's
quieter than Yoru's.
Yeah. Yeah, yours is pretty dang loud. I think it is quieter than yours. It's also visible, you know, like yours is invisible, whereas Chambers is like you can see it always. So
yeah, because I think John Kazicki said that in like the little show to us, is just Euro's going to be using his teleport to get in behind you a lot. So naturally that should be having a louder audio cue, because if it didn't, it'd be a bit broken. But because you can't play aggressively with the teleport, because you can't throw it out and take space, you need to have that space ahead of time. It's a bit more subtle, but not to the point where you don't hear it at all. That's just one thing I wanted to put at the end, because I mean there's been a couple of misconceptions about that.
Gotcha.
And that's it for this time. Thank you very much for watching. Next time we'll be talking about the patch, some of the future changes that are coming into the game, as well as the 5-stack system that's coming back in the next patch and all that. So be sure to tune into that one. It should be in a couple of days' time. Thanks for watching. Take care. We'll see you next time.